Welcome to Off-Road Travel TV.
We're here at the Beta Factory Race Shop in Paso Robles, California with AMA Hall of Famer Rodney Smith. Rodney's also an AMA Grand National Cross Country Champion, ISD gold medalist, and he's here to give us a lot of tech tips today.
In this episode, we're going over the top 12 most frequently missed setup and maintenance items for dirt bikes. So on greasing your linkage and your swing arm bearings, if you have the opportunity to do it when the bike is new, is best because everything's still clean and you can get a good layer of grease in there before you've even ridden the bike, which helps out on wear and everything. If you don't have that opportunity, obviously it's a little bit harder. You got to clean out all the dirt and stuff before you grease the bearings, but very important to grease the swing arm bearings, the linkage bearings, everything that moves. You also want to do your headset bearings. And then another set that everybody kind of forgets about is your brake calipers. Your brake calipers are floating calipers on the rear and front disc. So it's very important. There's two pins. You want to make sure you get not a lot of grease, but just a good layer of a little bit of grease in there so that they stay clean, they stay new, they float better, because if they ever get dry and stick, the brakes actually won't work as good. Grips are very important, especially if your bike's new. You want to make sure they're glued on. You get a good layer, safety wire them. Even if the bike's not new to you, if it's used or whatever, you still want to make sure you've glued your grips, you've safety wired them, they're good and proper, because if you ever get out on a bad day of riding in the rain or whatever and they come loose, you don't want to ruin your day of riding. It's kind of important how you put the grips on, especially if they're half waffle grips. On this one is actually a half waffle, and the bike here is also half waffle. The waffle part is actually where you want your fingers to do the gripping. So if you're riding in mud or rain or any kind of bad conditions, the waffle part's where your fingers are actually what grip the handlebars or the grip. So it's very important as you're riding your style, if you're a guy that rides with the elbows up, you want to have that grip rotate a little bit more forward flush. That way when you're on here it's flat, smooth, and the grip actually is smaller, but your fingers are what are hitting the waffle, so when it gets packed with mud and stuff, you still have grip. If you get the grip rolled back a little bit too far this way, the heavier part is going to be up here where your calluses and stuff are, so it's actually make the grip feel fatter, and then your fingers are only gripping on where it's smooth and slippery where you can't grip. So, grip preferences, like for me, is a little bit more forward, the grip feels smaller, and my fingers are actually in the waffle, and that's very important. So another item, especially when the bike is new or the bike's new to you, fork height is something you want to check. If you're out riding in desert and high-speed conditions, you'll want to lower these forks down in the triple clamps where they're kind of flush. That'll give you a little bit longer wheelbase, makes the bike a little bit more stable out in the whoops and stuff. If you're riding more tighter woods type conditions, then you want to bring this up here, more of a standard positions right here. You can actually bring it up a little bit higher if you needed to ride tighter type woods. But kind of figure out what's comfortable with you on your own bike as you ride it. But very important to set your fork height and also your rider sag. So we talked a little bit about fork height and rider position. You also at the same time want to check your rider sag. That's also adjusts the ride height of your bike, and it kind of gives you a little bit more of a chopper feel, or you can be a little bit more over the front type feel. Everybody rides a little bit different than everybody. You can check your your owner's manual to find out what the actual specs are. Most bikes are standard around 100, 105. It takes two people to actually set your sag. So you want to check the distance from the axle up to like a straight point of the fender. And then you, with your riding gear and stuff on, you get on the bike, you sit in a neutral position, and you have your buddy hold you up, and he measures. Now he measures the distance after you're sitting on it, and you subtract it and you find out if it's 100 millimeters, 105 millimeters, 110. If it's 110 millimeters, that means you have quite a bit of sag and you want to take it to 105, you actually put tension on the rear spring. If it's at 99 and you want to go to 105, then you actually have too much spring preload, so you want to back off the clips and back off the spring a little bit. What's important is to get the ride height of the bike where it's comfortable for you. If you're out, again, like if you're out riding in desert and stuff like that where it's high speed and whoops, you want to lower the forks down, the clamps more like a chopper, and you'd actually run a little bit less sag in the back to get it to squat down a little bit more. You get a little more stability in high speeds. If you're riding more arena cross or more tight woods, you kind of want to bring the back sag up a little bit, and you want to lower down the forks in the clamps. So on this tip, on your chain, put it on the master clip the right way. When you spin the wheel the direction it's going to be going, you want to make sure the clip is going the opposite direction so that anything, when it goes through the chain guide, it doesn't catch the two ears and knock off the clip. You want to make sure the clip is backwards so that it's anything that gets in the way, it doesn't knock the clip off. Another thing you want to make sure you do is go over all your bolts. A good T-handle would help, but you want to make sure the shifter is good and tight. You want to make sure your Kickstarter bolt's nice and tight, because a lot of people forget those and they fall off. Checking the spokes, checking all the bolts, just making sure everything's nice and tight. I like to set the bars up, not so they fall totally freely when you got the bike on a stand, the front wheel's off the ground. You want to like touch the handlebars, and you want it to fall freely, but not real super freely, because then they're a little bit loose. Some guys like to run them a little bit tighter. They kind of use it like a steering stem or like a dampener. But I do want the bars to kind of fall down to where the lock is, but not real free. It's kind of a preference thing. I recommend changing your oil about every 2 rides. It's a good safety factor. It keeps your motor clean, keeps the motor running good. It extends the longevity of your bike actually. So every 2-3 rides, I recommend you make sure you change your oil. I also recommend cleaning your air filter as often as you can, especially if the conditions are dusty. You definitely want to make sure you change it every ride. If you're out riding in the winter and you've got good conditions, it's not so dusty, you can at least check it after you rode and make sure it's still clean for the next ride. But air filter is something you definitely want to keep clean as often as you can. It actually protects the motor and keeps the longevity going good. I also recommend that you change your radiator fluid, or at least check it as often as you can, especially with today's modern day 4-strokes. You might be out riding with your buddies and you stop to talk to them for a little bit or whatever, and the bike overheats and it will lose a little bit of water and you don't know it. So after 2 or 3 rides, you don't know it, you've actually lost a cup or 2 of antifreeze. So it's very important on today's bikes to check the level of the antifreeze, make sure it's good and full. There's also different types of antifreezes some people use, but I also recommend that you flush it out and change your antifreeze about every 6 months, because antifreeze can actually break down and not work as good as it does when it's new. So antifreeze is actually almost like an oil or whatever that does break down and lose its velocity. So I recommend that you change out the complete fluid system about every 6 months. But I do recommend checking the level pretty much every ride. I recommend on air pressure. Air pressure is a little bit different for everybody and a little bit different on the types of tires, but pretty much the common rule is most people run 12 pounds of air pressure in their front and rear tires. If it's real rocky conditions, I might run it up to 14, 15 pounds. If it's super dry, hard packed, slippery, not big chance of flat tires, I might run it down as low as 10 or so to get traction. But a good common thing is 12 pounds. Another thing people don't realize is if you have good heavy duty tubes in your bike, they're actually real rubber and they breathe. So if you put a heavy duty or a different tube in your bike that's standard, the standard ones are more synthetic. They actually hold the air pressure. If you have 15 pounds in it and a month later it'll be still 15 pounds, well, a real tube is made out of rubber, which is actually good heavy duty tubes. They actually will lose. If you start out with 12 pounds of air, in 2 weeks it might be down to 7 or 8 pounds. So it's very important to check your air pressure in your tires before every ride. Thanks for watching, and I hope all these tips help.